John Wertz here, Montgomery County Tea Party, and we are interviewing Jon Bouche for the Groundwater District position 3.
Yes.
Precinct 3. It's September 18th, and with me are Del Fessenden, Bob Bagley, Dennis Tibbs, and Pat Tibbs. And as we talked about, give you up to 5 minutes for your opening, and then we'll start the Q&A.
Okay. Well, my name is Jon Bouche. I live in Oak Ridge North. I'm running for the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District, position 3, which is James Nowak's area. My wife and I have lived in Montgomery County for 13 years. My wife is Janine. We raised 3 kids here. Cody, Kyle, and Carly. They're all moved out, so we're empty nesters. My oldest is 27. My youngest is 23. I'm 52 years old, if y'all are doing the math. I'm a 1990 graduate of Sam Houston State University. I have a criminal justice degree, a BA in law enforcement and police science. I was fortunate enough to be in the Honor Society there. I'm a lifetime Golden Key Honor Society member. I worked in the private sector for about 20 years in various positions, operations, asset protection. Traveled all over the United States and Puerto Rico. I've held positions as high as senior director. I'm not sure what else to say. I'm trained in various aspects of auditing, investigations, interviews, interrogations, and those sorts of things. And I am the chairman of the Freedom and Liberty Conservative PAC. I work with the Tea Parties closely, all of them. And I am a Christian conservative. My wife and I, Janine, are members of Woods Edge Community Church and have been for about 15 years. I volunteer there also. I'm the chairman of the Lone Star Christian Chamber of Commerce. I am also the vice chairman of Love Street Alliance, which is an organization that brings the healing power of music into the Children's Hospital and the Shriners Hospital. So we've been doing that for over 10 years now. And on a personal note, I love music, and I am the front man for Johnny and the Sensations. We play a lot of venues around this area in Houston. I've been doing that for a very long time.
All righty. Appreciate that.
Yes,
thanks again for coming in. So what makes you qualified? So you're not a hydrologist or an engineer, an attorney, which seems to be some of the board makeup right now. What makes you qualify for this office, and name 3 reasons that you think you're the best candidate for this position?
Sure, I think I'm the best candidate for this position because throughout my career, I've been charged with sitting down and looking at reports and analyzing data and trying to determine where things are going and where they've been, and making quality decisions. I've been very successful in every company that I've worked for doing that. Saved them a lot of money, and I've won a lot of awards doing that, my team and I have. I do know that there's this question about me not being a hydrologist. It's also true that I never fabricated a silicone chip or a circuit board, but I did pretty well with CompUSA as a senior director, and we were the #1 region the whole time I was there, and saved the company a lot of money. I have the ability to get to the bottom of things. I have a dogged determination to find out the cause of things, to analyze things, to make sure that they're not a problem going forward, and put contingencies in place to do those things. Everything is a cost-benefit analysis with me when I'm looking at these things, and I think that sort of experience, 20 years of doing that, traveling all over, audit experience, investigations experience, team building, I think those will serve me well in this position on the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation Board. So it's a whole different skill set and experience that I haven't seen any of the other members bring to the table.
All right, thanks. Bill?
You're a busy man with many hats. How much time do you think that this Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District will take? How much time are you prepared to commit to that? Where are you going to find that time and energy?
Well, that's a fair question, because I do stay very busy. The answer to your question will be determined by once we get in there to see how much of a problem there is and what we have to do. The time commitment, I'm blessed that I do work for myself, so my schedule is very flexible, so I can, I can move things around as I need to. I'm pretty good at managing my time. The time commitment I was told was understated, I'm sure. I believe it is going to take a considerable effort to get in there, at least on the front end of it, and see what's going on once you get into the books and see the relationships that are going on. I do plan to work with Webb Melver quite a bit because he's been on the board. And this whole experience for me has been about learning. There are just volumes of paper that I've been reading, trying to understand the issues. One of the things in my training as an investigator that it showed me is, I had this experience where I'd have to get on a plane, go to some place I'd never been, met someone I never met, and have them tell me something that they would never tell anybody. So during that trip, I would thousands of times in my head go over every possible scenario of what could be going on and what the possible reasons could be for that. And that's how I'm approaching this job also. I'm trying to find out all the information I can find out about it. I do have concerns at first blush looking at this. So to give you a straight answer on how much the time commitment is going to be, I won't know, but I will put in whatever it takes to get it straightened out.
Are you going to have to give up anything you're currently involved in?
I think it's going to be a matter of managing my time. If it comes to a point where I need to step off from being a precinct chair for precinct 35, I am prepared to do that because I think this position is much more important to this county, well, to the state, really. I mean, this is a huge issue, this groundwater board.
Okay, thank you. Bob.
You talked about going through the papers and everything. Have you had a chance to review the budget?
I looked at the financial statement that they put out not so long ago, and I had a real concern about that. I haven't looked at the budget necessarily in granular detail. The financial statement they put out, are the one you're talking about where they had $11 million depreciation on the bottom line? Without any explanation?
Talking about overall, I mean, we're in budget season right now for the next due year, so they would have had to put a budget together now for the incoming board to operate off of.
I saw their expense statement that they put out, and it was concerning to me in the sense that you go all the way down the statement, and it's in the black, and then the last line, there's an entry for $11 million depreciation, which I don't understand. There's no detail accompanying that. I've never seen anything like that before. So I would be looking at the budget, but my biggest concern and my first question would be, what's this $11 million? What did it offset, and where did the money go?
Are they depreciating their building and on the facilities?
There was no detail associated with
Right.
it. So I don't know if there's an upkeep, if there's a maintenance account, there's a holdback. There's no detail, which, again, when you do a P&L, and at the bottom line, you arbitrarily throw in an $11 million debit, I would kind of like to know where that is and what happened to the, 4 or 5 million they offset with that.
So you will be looking into that shortly?
I will be looking at everything, yes, sir.
I had one other question, and that was on your questionnaire you were asked about having 3 different sources for a contract before you let a contract go, and you said absolutely. I found that there really aren't any absolutes when you're trying to purchase from for specialty items, so you may only have a sole source bidder. So is it really absolute, or are you open to that?
Well, that's a fair point. I mean, if there's a limited number of vendors that can do that sort of work, then sure, you would just go with the best option there is. But I'm also, you got to be careful in those situations, because I've been on the front end of these projects before where people who are specialty vendors that the only ones that can do it, they know that as well. So they put stuff in there, and so they put stuff in there saying, we'll have it done by this date, and they promise you the world, and they overshoot it by a lot, and it costs a lot more than they said they would. So there would have to be some contingencies in place to make sure that didn't happen. But yeah, I agree with you. If there's a limited number of vendors that operate in that space, then yeah, you're not going to get 3.
Okay, Lone Star is in the the groundwater management area 14, which has several counties in it, and a handful of other conservation districts and some subsidence districts. Do you know anything about those other conservation districts, or if Lone Star communicates with them, if they have pumping restrictions, or are we the only ones in the entire world that has pumping restrictions?
I have been told, been informed by several people that we're the only ones with pumping restrictions. And that's something I would definitely want to look at. I don't understand why that is. That's just one of the several issues that I think need to be looked at. I tell people we don't really have a groundwater conservation district. It seems like we have a groundwater monetization district. And that's a great concern to me when you're putting these restrictions and these caps on things that are driving people to more expensive water. And especially when I look and I see the same faces, at least one same face on both boards. It seems like a real conflict of interest to me. So my antenna definitely goes up over that. So as far as the other regulations and the other GMAs, I'm not sure about those, but I have been told that we're the only ones with a pumping restriction.
Would that be important to find out, because we're the only ones in the entire state that's subject to that, then that's maybe even more of a problem than we see. All right, thanks.
Of course it is.
It would appear that back in 1997, the Texas State Legislature enacted legislation in the form of Chapter 36, which I'm sure you read about,
I've read a lot about this stuff.
of the Texas Water Code. Seemingly had good intentions of trying to conserve or manage groundwater. And they gave statutory authorities to the groundwater conservation districts across state to enforce compliance or prevent overdrawing or wasting of water. Under the premise of private property ownership, do you or do you not subscribe to the fact that, like mineral rights, the groundwater district has no authority to limit water recovery, and that ownership extends to property boundaries as well as everything in between heaven and the core of the earth?
Yes, you touched on something really interesting, because the Texas Constitution does guarantee that right. But there's also an addendum that says, but this would in no way preclude the state from regulating this, which I think is a conflict within the very verbiage of the Texas Constitution. So in principle, yes, I do agree, stuff drawn out of the ground belongs to you and should belong to you. I think the pressure that's being put on people by the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District is probably driven partially by the SJRA pressure that they're getting. Because, I mean, think about this. Free market principles at play. If groundwater was cheaper, we wouldn't be having this discussion about groundwater. I mean, there would be competition, people could draw it from different sources, and the market would make up its mind, but we don't have that right now. So yes, I agree with you. It should belong to the property owner, what they bring up.
So can you explain, and we got about a minute left, this incestuous relationship between the groundwater district and SJRA as it stands now?
I can give you a first blush opinion of it. Again, I would have to dig more in depth. I mean, it's hard to read the cover of a book and just think you know how it ends. But it looks to me like the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District is putting policies in place that are greatly benefiting those who have a financial interest in the SJRA right now. Whether those policies are founded on solid science is another thing altogether, which we'd have to look more into. But what I do see is there's some similarities between this debate and the debate about global warming. Because anytime you question the science that they're putting forth to justify what they're doing, they say you're in favor of dirty water and dirty air. And I'm already sort of getting some of that when I question the science from what the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District is doing. You saw this article that was just recently published and shared claiming that we're in favor of unlimited pumping, which is absolutely absurd. That's not what we're advocating for. We're advocating for responsible policies. And yeah, there is a relationship between the SJRA and the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District that's very obvious when you have a board member on each board. And I don't know, it just doesn't pass the smell test to me. I mean, I characterize it as tolling our water, because long after all the infrastructure is paid for, long after that's done, you're still gonna have these rising water bills. They're still gonna be there in perpetuity. Something needs to change about that.
Okay, you said you started reading the
Oh, yeah.
Luminous, okay. Of the documents you've read, can you cite one that has been most enlightening and why?
Wow. Well, there's a lot of different hydrologist studies about this that I've read. Some agree, some disagree. There was one from A&M that I remember reading that talked about the lack of subsidence in the area. And that was the thing that got me thinking, because just about every evil ever perpetrated on man has been done in the name of the greater good, if you think about it. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. They say, well, for the greater good and the preservation of the aquifer, we need to do these things. But oh, by the way, we're going to make a lot of money when we do it. So that's probably the one that was most enlightening to me, because if there's 180 million acre feet below us, and you really want to preserve the aquifer, but you're not going to do anything to affect the price of groundwater, your options are kind of limited at that point. Wouldn't you agree? Are you going to stop people moving from Montgomery County? No, you're not going to stop that. Are you going to somehow grow the aquifer? No, you're not going to do that either. So these studies have really been the most enlightening things to me, reading these and seeing the sort of the conflicting opinions of things. It seems like we have one side trying to scare people into doing these policies on the Lone Star, and then this other, Texas A&M study that's saying there's no subsidence here. And some of the comparisons I'm seeing of coastal ecological situations to Montgomery County, which is a total apples to oranges comparison, but that's what they're trying to do to make the case for these groundwater regulations. So those things are probably the most intriguing to me that I plan to dig into more.
Okay, so replenishment versus depletion and so forth.
Recharge.
Recharge. Any great insights there?
I do. If you're telling me, and I did talk to a gentleman, Samuel, can't remember his last name. He owns a well drilling company, and I had this crazy idea, which just follow me here, about infusion wells for artificial recharge. Now the environmentalists will go crazy over this because groundwater has different microbodies and things in it that surface water has different makeup than groundwater. But we have the ability to treat it going in and coming out. So I talked to Samuel and I said, how hard would it be to have a recharge well in these low-lying areas? Now picture this, flood mitigation. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we saw a storm brewing off the coast, if we could divert a lot of our surface water, treat it into our aquifer to reduce the surface water levels, to avoid flooding? We don't have that capability right now. But yet we have a group basing policy on a hypothesis, and which is driving up prices, and we're doing nothing for flood mitigation at all, and they're scaring us with subsidence, even though there's no evidence of subsidence in Montgomery County. So if you really had a concern about subsidence in Montgomery County, wouldn't you at least look at artificial recharge as an option to keep the water levels where they should be? We have plenty of water. I mean, Harvey would have recharged our aquifer for the next 10 years or so, but we didn't do any of that. And you have to ask yourself, why?
It's probably because the aquifers are full.
So talking subsidence, we know that the wells here in Conroe area specifically have been here for over 50 years. And there's been no sign of any subsidence. We also know that there's wells in Houston that the ground has subsided quite a bit. I wasn't here when the Woodlands was developed, nor was I here when King was developed, but my understanding is that both of those developments, that was low-lying ground. It was basically wetlands. And millions of tons of dirt was brought in to fill that up. you can fill something up, but it still takes time, and especially when you're on a fault, for that soil to compact.
Compact itself.
Totally. So I'm not saying that it's subsidence isn't happening, but just for instance, just, you know, what's the possibility that this is just because that dirt was brought in? It has nothing to do with the water.
Well, you bring up a fair point, and that was my point earlier when they're comparing coastal ecological conditions to way inland conditions to justify policy. I don't think it's fair to look at Harris County and their subsidence, which I think was at 9 feet last time I looked, and compare that to Montgomery County. The real question is do we have a subsidence problem in Montgomery County? Are we depleting the aquifer? Do we have an artesian pressure problem in some of our wells? And there have been a few, but that has, there's different conditions which can cause that. Again, I'm not in favor of waiting till there's a big subsidence problem here. We should be vigilant about that. But even, you know, depleting the aquifer beneath the earth, and I've talked to, you know, hydrologists and hydrogeologists about this, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. If we have compaction of 10 feet below the surface, it doesn't equal compaction of 10 feet on the surface. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. So I don't like comparing Harris County as a harbinger of things to possibly come with Montgomery County. We need to be vigilant and keep an eye on Montgomery County. We're in a unique situation here. You're right, they are closer to the coast. Their composition is much different. Their situation is much different.
You know, this whole thing is just the latest of a series of things that affect citizens and taxpayers. A couple of decades ago, we thought we had all the water in the world, we just found a way. And then things began to happen within government, and usually that involved groups of government coordinating or conspiring with each other to the detriment of the taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of Lone Star, and that usually means some lobbyist somewhere. So who does Lone Star use? Does Lone Star have a lobbyist that goes and maybe SJRA too, that gets the Water Development Board or the legislatures to do the things that we see right now have been done wrong?
I could not answer that for you. I don't know if they have a lobbyist. What I do see is that it's set up this way by the legislature and the, was it the Texas TW, whatever.
Water Development Board.
Yeah, TWDB, yes. And they set this up already, so as you saw today at the meeting, there's already a narrow lane about this. And I don't know if you caught it, but they said you can change whatever you want as long as you don't change the one thing that we've already codified that matters, that affects everything. So the table's already been set. We need people on that board. Whether they have lobbyists or not is sort of irrelevant to what the code says about what they're doing, because that's what the code says. I don't know if the lobbyists were on the front end of that when the legislature passed this into existence. I imagine there was. But in principle, let's be honest, I think the idea of a groundwater conservation district is a good thing. We need to protect our water supply. We need to look at the longevity of our water supply. I love Montgomery County. I want this water to be here for all the future generations. But I don't think it's coincidental that the same usual suspects that are involved in everything when you start digging into it are the ones who are becoming very much enriched off of this natural resource. I jokingly said to somebody, they go, we got to stop phase 2. And I said, phase 2? And they explained they're doing more build out. I said, I'm more concerned about phase 3. And they go, what is that? I said, oxygen. If they're taxing our water, they're coming for our oxygen next. I mean, I think it is that absurd, honestly.
You might say that some of the board members are their lobbyists. Good.
Seems like the main reason our water bills have doubled is that the groundwater district has forced an arbitrary groundwater withdrawal rate. They call it DFC, or desired future conditions, of 64,000 acre feet per year due to phase 2 DRP district regulatory plan, they have acronyms and descriptions for everything, that the groundwater district implemented back in January 1st, 2015, or somewhere around that time. These rules are promulgated a reduction of 30% from all groundwater users. Do you know where they came up with those numbers? And please reference any studies.
First of all, the DFC is desired future conditions, and the 64,000 acre feet are what they project that they need to achieve that. The DFC is not 64,000, it's the level of groundwater use they believe that is optimal to achieve the DFC. So just want to make sure we're clear on that. The 30% reduction, I mentioned earlier, we're forming policy on a hypothesis. For those of you familiar with the scientific method, and this speaks to why I think I would be good at this job, I don't go by the scientific method whenever I investigated something. For the thousands of investigations I did, I let the data speak to me, and then I traced it to its logical end, and that's what I was left with. The scientific method we all understand. You form a hypothesis, and then you try and make that work with various experiments. Unfortunately, in this case, we took our hypothesis of the 64,000 acre feet, and we formed policy off of it. So anything derived from that, in my mind, is the fruit of the poisonous tree, because now you're saying we're going to take 30% of an arbitrary number and set a target. How does that even work? It doesn't work. So we need to look at that, at those levels, and see if they make sense. Last I heard, the depletion of that aquifer for use for the last 100 years was 0.0003% in one of them. So there is a recharge going on there. You know, so no, those numbers are arbitrary as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, SJRA has incurred substantial debt to build their water facility. If we stop recouping fees from water users, how are they going to pay that debt?
Again, I'm a proponent of the free market. I believe that at the onset of that project, when that train already left the station, I think that should have been a bond before the voters. They should have had informed consent and voted on it and understood what the end of it was. You heard me refer to it as a toll before, because I think that's what it is, because it's going to go on in perpetuity. I think we need to look at what that reimbursement is for that infrastructure that was built, look at their operating expenses. I don't think we should support an ongoing bureaucracy, and I don't think we should be tolling a natural resource that we all need. And that's what I intend to do when I get on that board.
Okay. Bob?
Yes.
Do you know anything about the machine that is Lone Star? They got a great big building. Do you know anything about how many people they have and what the people that fill up that building do?
I don't know how big their staff is. I'm certain they're all very well paid. The derivative business off of the San Jacinto River Authority, which you can always trace it to the usual suspects in Montgomery County. It's the same people that are involved with our toll roads. Look at the attorney's fees associated with that. You know, it's always a happy byproduct when they do this stuff that all the same people are getting rich off of it. I wish I could speak to more about the
Do
same.
you know what the budget is for them?
I don't know, but I heard they had like $55 million or something in the bank or something crazy like that.
Well, is their only revenue the few dollars that they get on our water bill? Because SJRA gets most of it, right?
SJRA gets most of it. Yeah, you switch gears on me a little bit. Lone Star people get
Lone Star get
negligible.
a few dollars, yeah.
Yeah, about 41% or whatever the water bills I've seen are SJRA.
Right.
And one of the constituents in the area sent me his water bill for the month of September. It was $971. And I was like, that's a big number. He goes, John, what do? I go, freeze it and build an igloo, because that's a house note. It's huge. You know, so when water bills start having a comma on them, that's a problem.
Yeah.
We need to look at that closely. I mean, they don't have those kind of water bills in mountainous regions of the United States where it's harder to get water up there. I mean, this is just absurd.
And they don't have it next door. in Liberty or Grimes?
No, they don't. They do not, and they also didn't pay, 30-something million dollars a mile for a toll road, but that's something we can talk about at another time.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. The Groundwater District likes to refer to the fact that mining the aquifer exceeds the sustainable yield of recharge. So in other words, they say we're depleting groundwater faster than nature can replenish it. To your knowledge, has this been proven true for the Gulf Coast aquifer is concerned? And if so, can you cite any report that substantiates this?
I mentioned the A&M report earlier, which would refute that, number one. The argument they put forth, and if you listen to them talk about it, they like to compartmentalize water. Now again, I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a hydrogeologist. I was surprised that there's a difference between those two things, but I did learn that in this process. But what I did do is I took third grade science at one point, and I understood the water cycle, okay? I understand you don't compartmentalize and say, well, there's groundwater, and there's surface water, and there's other water that comes from the sky. It's all part of the water cycle. So when they scare you about mining, which is really a term, when you think about mining something, you think about depleting a resource and removing it. When you mine coal and you pull it out and it's not replenished. So I think that's verbiage that they use for that purpose. Yes, it is possible that we could be using water at a faster rate than it is recharging naturally. If you're going to operate under the alibi of the free market and say that this is causing a shortage in this, and so we have a supply and demand thing, which, oh, by the way, we're going to get rich off of, again, I think that's wrong. So I can't speak to the recharge, whether it's adequate or not. I can just tell you that the studies I've seen from Texas A&M and others says our aquifers are not being depleted here. That doesn't mean they won't in the future. We keep growing, and that's going to change. We need responsible people that are able to look at the data objectively and do the right thing for the right reason, the right way, instead of worried about how it's going to affect somebody's bank account.
Okay. Bill?
Okay. Currently, we have Texas Water Board, SJRA, LSGCD. Is that the right structure? If you were starting from scratch, how would you properly manage this resource? What kind of a structure would you like to see in place? And how do we get there?
I think the devil's in the details with any of this. I think you need to have regulatory boards. I don't think there's any way around that. I mean, you wouldn't want somebody having, a well on their property where they're dumping toxic waste into it. I mean, you need to protect the aquifer. So the structure, I'm okay with the structure, but I would like to limit the scope of what these people are doing in some of these instances. The relationship between the SJRA and the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District is problematic, obviously. If I had to start it over, I mean, that's an interesting question. I would have a surface water, board. I certainly would. I would have a Lone Star, or I'd have a Groundwater Conservation District board. I would respect property rights, but I would certainly aim to protect the integrity and the longevity of the well to the best of my ability. But again, the reason we're having the discussion is the artificial cap limit and the high price of surface water. So I think the real attack here, which is to get some reasonableness on the surface water and get rid of those fees that are in perpetuity. I think that's a good place to start.
So relationships with cities, counties, what is their role?
Well, I think you can't manage an aquifer within political boundaries. So that's a problem, because the town next door, imagine, we're talking about an aquifer with 180 million acre feet, but imagine a small aquifer just for a second. We have 4 towns sharing this aquifer, and one of them decides to start the Dale Fesden water business. and starts pumping all the water out of their deal and saying, well, this is on our property, it's the Texas Constitution, and they deplete the aquifer for the other 3 towns. So I think the aquifer needs to be managed, not the political boundaries. So yes, I do think there needs to be, state regulation of that to some level. And by the way, these aquifers don't respect state boundaries either. So we share them with other states as well, in some instances. So that gets complicated. It does get complicated.
You brought up about not pumping hazardous stuff into the wells, into the aquifers. Were you aware of Texcom? It's an organization, it's a private company, getting property and getting rights to be able to dump toxic chemicals into the old Conroe oil field?
I was not aware of that specifically. I know they had a similar situation down south towards Friendswood at one point, that they ended up condemning that whole neighborhood. It's like a ghost town down there.
Well, we've been fighting this for about 15 years. If it goes through, and Lone Star has been on our side so far, because if that goes through and the hazardous waste are pumped into the old wells,
Yeah.
The possibility of destroying the aquifer from here all the way down to Galveston is very likely. And it's going to be an issue that you're going to have to deal with if you get elected, or when you get elected.
I would certainly like to learn more about that, because that cannot happen. I will do everything I can. I will have my Tiananmen Square moment standing in front of the trucks where they will not be able to do that. We cannot allow that to happen. We will not allow that to happen.
Okay.
So what do you know about the SJRA relationship with the city of Houston? You know, how much of Lake Conroe does each own, and does that commitment last forever, or is there an end date to it?
I'll just confess to you, I haven't done a lot of studying on the SJRA. My focus has been on Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District. And while in many cases they may seem synonymous, they're not. They're two autonomous entities. Each has their own warts that we can certainly look at, and their challenges. But I can't speak to the relationship between SJRA and anything towards Harris County, Houston.
Does Lone Star charge every user in the county?
From what I understand, it's not every user in the county. There is an exemption of 10 million gallons or below. They're not charged and they're not diverted. So I don't think they charge every user.
Like homeowners?
No.
But do they still have to register their wells?
Yes, permitted.
Okay.
They have to get a permit to get the well, but they're not going through.
They're not metered.
Right, they're not metered.
Yeah, but they're all registered. They have a permitting process in Lone Star. Every well is has to be permitted.
Not metered yet.
Yet. That's probably a good point.
3 horsepower or over, even though it's on private property, it's 3 horsepower or larger.
So, in your answer under the general question, I asked if we had a water shortage or other, and you said there's a regulatory issue. All this is a regulatory issue. Pre-design, you think, just for certain people to make money off of?
Like I said, I think it's a monetization district right now. I do. I don't think that's coincidental. I think the regulations, when you look at how they were derived and how they're applied and the results of that, I don't see how you get around that.
So, when enforcing the management of groundwater under Chapter 36 of the Texas Water Code, it kind of gets to a point that there were good intentions there at the state level, but when it got to the local groundwater district level, where they have the ability to implement a set of rules, that's where things went wrong, right? Because then The purpose of the rules are to carry out powers and duties, and control subsidence, prevent degradation of water quality that you talked about, that we all want, prevent waste of groundwater. So there's two, apparently a major objective of the groundwater district rules is establish a permitting program, and you touched on it, the 10 million gallons per year, I guess it is.
It's an exemption, yeah.
Yeah, 25,000 gallons a day, I guess. Are there fees associated with this usage, and are there fines for non-compliance?
I talked to the Quad Vest people who said there's fines for non-compliance with this. And they were forced into a contract under the threat of being fined $10,000 a day for non-compliance. So yes, there's a big stick, and there's not much of a carrot there. You know, we do all agree on preserving these things and having all these wonderful things, preservation of our drinking water, our aquifer, fighting subsidence. But did you know that in the original discussion about the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District, you know what else they talked about? Controlling cost. Go look at the board now, the description on the website. That's conspicuously missing all of a sudden. So, again, I think that was a great idea at the state level when you stand before the legislature and say, we're going to do all these wonderful things and we're going to control costs. And then you get back to Montgomery County, when you cross the county line, go ahead and skip that part about cost control. Because we're not controlling costs. We need to control costs.
Okay. At least twice now, you've made reference to people who are making money off this water deal. To the naive folks who might think that all that they're doing is operating costs and debt retirement, who are the beneficiaries of the surplus?
Oh, wow. You put me on the spot.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm a free market capitalist. I have no problem with people making money. I think people should be compensated for their work that they do, for the services they provide. In this particular instance, I talked about jokingly about them tolling our oxygen. I think we're not talking about trading tech stocks here. We're talking about water. We all need water. I think profiteering off of water to the extent that they do is criminal. I do. When you have all these many millions of dollars in the bank, I want you to be reimbursed for your infrastructure. I want you to be reimbursed for whatever amount it takes to maintain that. And certainly I'd like for you to make a living. But if you want me to name names, I mean, I think you just look at go look at their website, the people that they contribute to, that they pay, where the money's going out. You can look at it and see. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars going to certain organizations, big contracts. Usual suspects with the toll roads. The same people, attorneys, are making ridiculous money off of this. And this money they're taking in on the bills, they're then turning around and suing the people who are trying to fight them on these exorbitant bills. So, I mean, this, and I know I'm being filmed here, but I'll say it because it's just how I am. To say it's organized crime understates the problem. That's how I look at it. I think it's so entangled and so, this is just the way we do it and this is the way we've always done it. I think it needs to be looked at really closely. I'm not saying anybody's doing anything wrong in particular. I'm saying that if you look at the whole system, the way it's set up right now, it needs a real close examination because it's not working for the citizens in Montgomery County right now.
Well,
I had it and got lost. Come back.
We go back to it. You know, this whole groundwater reduction plan is made up of several phases. You know, I've heard 4 phases, and I guess this is phase 1. Do you know what the extent of phase 1 and what 2, 3, and 4 are?
No, I don't. Phase 1 is what we have now. I think there's like $5 billion or something spent on this thing. It's some crazy big number. 500 million. Might as well.
It's a little over that, close to 600 million.
Yeah. Phase 2, there's supposed to be some other treatment facilities built that are gonna, cost the taxpayers a lot of money also, and of course, this is all rolled into everybody's water bills again. Where's the free market competition?
Is this a SJR8?
Yes.
It's really Lone Star's Groundwater Recovery Act, right? Public plan. But they don't have anything to do with treatment facilities, do they?
No. they
They're
don't.
just being buddies with SJRA.
There is an entanglement there. I can't speak to phase 2 or 3 or 4.
I get it.
Again, I want to get in and see what they're doing, because what they're doing is obviously got a lot of people upset and it's just not working.
Yeah. Come back to you, Bob.
I mean, one of the board members, one of the potential prospective board members said, we need to kill phase 2. And I said, well, what is that? He goes, it's the next phase. I'm like, I picked up on that.
You know,
But,
we do.
but let's, I'm not gonna talk about things I don't know anything about. I don't know what phase 2 is proposed. As I said earlier, what's proposed is never what it looks like when it starts working, and certainly not how it ends up.
But this is the tip of the iceberg anyway.
Yes, sir.
More time.
Bob, as a new director, are you open to start going out, not just your meetings, but visiting with the MUDs within Precinct 3?
Absolutely.
And letting them know who you are, and as, like I said, on the board, to be able to work with them and talk to them and find out their needs to take it back to work.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think you know enough about me to know that I'm involved in a lot of everything. I'm hungry for knowledge and to know who knows what. That's another thing about me. I have no problem picking up the phone and calling people and saying, tell me what you know about this issue. That's the first thing I did today, was I got the card from the hydrogeologist at the meeting, because I want to know all about this. The board member who was speaking about things that had happened in the past and the different chemicals that he found in the water in certain areas. I said, hey, here's my card, please call me. I mean, I think that's important, because one person is not as smart as all the people in the circle. It's just not going to work that way. So I need to pull that knowledge from people, and the more data you have, the better decision you can make.
I know
So I'd like to talk to all those.
I know currently we have board members that represent the east side of 45, or the west side of 45, or Conroe. But I'm living on the east side of 45 and been to MUD meetings, and there's never been any talk about anybody from Lone Star coming to visit, or any talk with the board members, the MUD board members, talking to the representative. So we have representation currently, but do we really, because there's no interaction?
I think that's a very good point, and we need to have some coordination and communication between the MUDs and the Lone Star Groundwater Board. I think that's very important, and we need to look at doing something about that.
Thanks.
All right, so why don't we take this last 5 minutes, if you want to go ahead and wrap it up with a closing.
Oh, okay, well, thank you. Well, I appreciate y'all having me here today. It's nice to see some friendly faces.
You thought we were friendly, huh?
Until it started.
Well, we have some challenges ahead of us in Montgomery County. I think you guys know me, and you've seen me on the front lines of every issue that we can advocate for residents. I'm not afraid to stand up for what's right, no matter how unpopular it might be with some people. And doing the right thing is its own reward, and I do strive to do the right thing the right way for the right reasons in all that I do. I stepped up to run for this board because it's a really important issue. There are a few people that ask me to do it because they know about my background. They know that I'm good at analyzing things and can come up with good decisions, and I'm not afraid to ask questions, and I chase down the right answers to things, and I don't get intimidated by people. So I think I will be an asset to this board. I think I have a good support system around me. I think there's a lot of very knowledgeable people, and I don't owe anybody anything. So I'm not, the only thing I owe is to the citizens of Montgomery County to do the right thing. This is a non-paying position, so it's not like I'm jumping in this to enrich myself. Certainly there were other things I could have done with my time, but I have a servant's heart, and this is how I choose to serve, so this is what I plan to do. And I appreciate you having me here today.
All right, appreciate it.